Welcome everyone to the Venari podcast. My name is Mark Collins. I am joined today by Sam Wolfenden, who is the CFO for North Europe in PepsiCo. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. So for those of you guys that don't know, I've been working with Sam for 8 years or so now, I think, roughly.
Yeah.
Give or take. So I've been working with him, and I've managed to bring in several strategy profiles over numerous years in different functions. But Sam comes from a consulting background, so it'd be good to understand, why you left consultancy early on, came up the traps pretty quickly. What were the drivers behind that, and maybe for someone from transitioning from consultancy to industry, what would you encourage them to look for essentially, and how to succeed in industry? So over to you.
Thanks, Mark. As you say, I spent a very short time in consultancy, around a year. Whilst I was in consultancy, I had the opportunity to work on a project that was effectively on the topic that I moved into in my first role in industry, which was revenue management. And that piqued my interest. I think the other thing, and I'll be very honest here, the attraction of moving from the heavy consulting hours into something that, at least at the time, I thought was a bit more stable, a little bit easier on the family life, was also attractive. And some of that is true, some of that plays out. It's not always an easy ride in industry, but I think for sure there is some truth to it being a little bit more predictable, a little bit more stable. But I think first and foremost, I got offered a really good opportunity in PepsiCo, the chance to join the setup of a new function, so revenue management, when we were setting that up back in the early 2000s. So the opportunity to go and join a very young function, you still had some of that. That strategic opportunity that you get in consulting.
To be fair, it must have been nice. Like if you're getting involved, you're making that switch, you can actually say, I did that and I helped to implement that.
Exactly. And I think as well, the other thing that comes to mind, and particularly when I talk about people who've joined our business from consulting at various stages in their careers, having a good bridging role is really important. So for me, that was something that was very nascent, still in the setup stages. So I could bring some of that consulting background to help get it set up. Very analytical, so it played to my strengths. Consultants often tend to think about this in a black and white way. So if I go into industry, I go straight into the operation. It depends where you go. A business our size has got the whole spectrum of roles, from actually roles that look very similar to a consulting role and just happen to be in industry, to those very, very operating type roles at the front end of the business. And I think choosing the right bridging role to get into industry is really important, because it helps you get used to the different pace of work, the different ways of working, the culture, but also gives you a chance to learn the business.
Do you find, Sam, that the first shift out is typically into an environment where similar people make similar moves, right? You made a conscious decision to go into revenue management because you were lucky enough to work on a project in consultancy that was interesting, and then you flipped that into actual industry, right? Do you think it was a conscious decision for you to help your long-term plan? Because ultimately you're now in a massive role, right? You're the CFO of North Europe for one of the most reputable FMCGs globally. So do you think that was a good stepping stone for you? Was it conscious?
With any opportunity, you look at things as they come up. I didn't sit there and plan, hey, I want to go into revenue management at PepsiCo. The opportunity popped up, and I wouldn't regret it at all. I think it was a great stepping stone. It was a great way to come into the business, because again, setting up a function, you build great profile, you build your equity fast within the business you're moving to. So it certainly helped. To
become a CFO, it's not just that analytical capability you acquire in consultancy, right? You then have to acquire a certain leadership, toolkit as well. So what would be the best piece of advice? What was the best piece of advice you received? And, what advice would you give to someone who wants to one day, do what you've done, which is access the C-suite?
Don't change too much all at once. And I'll explain that. I think You want to think, and I think about my career not as something I've drawn out and said, "Hey, I start in revenue management." I certainly did not sit there on day one and go, "I want to be the CFO in 16 years' time."
Yeah.
But I've thought about it as more as experiences that I've gained along the path to something, and I've always had a rough direction. Is it functionally commercial? Is it functionally financial? More strategic? I think for me, it's been more about how do I change little bits, role by role, to help me broaden my experience of the business. And I mean, CPG and PepsiCo's business is beautifully simple. I mean, we sell products that everyone knows and understands through channels that are quite that you shop in yourself. So understanding the business in the basic sense is not too difficult. Understanding how to grow it, how it works, how to eke out every bit of performance is the tougher bit.
You've done super well, you know, from your perspective, helping other people coming in. When you're hiring, what do you look for and how do you retain your staff?
Let me take the first bit on what do we look for. I think these days when we look at a CV or a person's set of experiences, we're looking less at that linear career path, right? So take the CFO. If we're interviewing for a CFO, we would want to see some finance experience, but we wouldn't necessarily look for that linear path of all of the different parts of finance, because I have certainly not done that. What we're looking for more is the critical experiences that would get you there, and build you the skill set and the leadership capability to do a big role like that. So we look for demonstration of things like analytical skills, of course, the kind of critical experiences that give you a real stretch. So maybe an M&A project or a big transformation, having led something non-operational. We'd certainly try and look for operational experience, but I think it's about demonstrating the set of skills that sums up towards being able to do the role.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that, you know, I've calculated it's about 45 profiles I've placed with you guys over the last 8 years or so. As we've gone along, it's not just been about raw analytical capability. You know, it's not just about modeling, metrics, analysis. It's about the capability of having both the IQ and the EQ to bring that to life, to land it with real life people where people will understand it from a simplistic fashion.
And you mentioned the EQ as well, which I think is really important. So when you're interviewing for a role with anyone, you want to test the culture. And that's another thing that we will really look for, particularly in the more senior roles. So much of what we do, and a huge part, at least 50% of my job, is about people management and interacting with people to get things done through the business. So you have to do that within the culture that exists, in my case, within PepsiCo. And that might not be the same as with another business or where you've come from previously. So I think testing your fit for that, and it's two-way, is really important.
PepsiCo is renowned as a business that's got a very, very good culture globally, not just in the UK or Europe or the States, but it's also renowned for a company that has got a very good rotation scheme, which allows people, you know, to move around the business, not just sit in one function. And you know, you probably remember this phrase, but consultants in my mind are very inquisitive people, and every 18 to 24 months, they start to get an itch to start looking around saying, I've done this gig now, where else am I going? And you guys have clearly demonstrated over the last decade that you are able to retain talent, and you are a clear example of that, Sam. So, but listen, really, really good to catch up. I'm, you know, stoked to see you doing so well, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the last 8 years.
Lovely to catch up, Mark.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Cheers, mate.